Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike.
Good morning, gentlemen, and happy Tuesday to you. It feels
Tuesday
like
it is.
Friday, but it is Tuesday.
It feels like a Friday, but it is a Tuesday. Oh boy.
Great.
Oh boy.
The workload is intense this week.
I think Mike, I asked you yesterday. I'm like, what day is it today? I'm like, because we've done a few recordings. I'm like, it feels like Thursday. Thursday.
I'm having a hard time keeping track of what day it is.
Yes.
You've basically been looking at me going, Tommy, you need sleep.
Tommy needs some sleep. Tommy's I can tell how much sleep Tommy has been getting by the status of the 5 o'clock shadow. If the shadow gets if the shadow gets darker, Tommy has been working really hard and not sleeping as much.
It's whether or not I'm at least willing to get the hair slightly wet before the podcast. Basically,
Exactly right. So a couple quick kind of openers or things we found across the internet. So Tommy and I have been doing kind of an exploration in Fabric, let's call it. We're doing Learning Fabric series, and we've been having a lot of fun. Actually, I've been really enjoying working with Fabric. I like working with the preview. I've been trying out features, trying to figure out what workflows would work for me, and just kind of explaining how to do very small pieces of data engineering, I guess, around Fabric for now. So in lieu of yesterday's video, we made a video around, hey, we're going to go pick a file from the lakehouse and we're going to transform it and we're going to drop it back in the lakehouse. And when we did the video, or as we were doing the video, there's a lot of questions that came out. We were like, why does this, when you create a data flow, you actually get 3 new objects called data flow staging something, right? Created by the user who's creating the data flow. And we're like, why are these 3 objects here? What does this mean? You know, what is occurring when I'm using the mashup engine or the Power Query engine to do certain things on top of the lakehouse? Well, within literally, we asked the questions during the episode, and we must have missed the blog, but the same day, somewhere throughout the day, Miguel Escobar, which amazing developer on the Microsoft product team, dropped a great article and literally answered all of our questions. So I will throw out this article here from Microsoft because it really answers a lot of our questions we were having yesterday around just data engineering and what's going on with Dataflows Gen 2. It's just very different than what we've thought about previously.
Yeah, and the best part too is Mike and I have been just talking about the direction of the demos. Like, well, should we actually do a different example for data flows rather than pulling a file out? And you know, as I tend to overthink initially with things like, well, what's the best use case for a data flow? And a lot of this was going with our previous understanding of how data flows worked, right?
Yeah.
So, and if I think Miguel's like, well, let me answer where data flows fit in, and it's really actually crazy how data flows actually work on the back end here.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of, even though it's the same UI, all the naming is the same, some real huge important concepts that are different. But which is hilarious, even in Gen 1, this was Microsoft's like best practices for enterprise teams using data flows.
Yes.
So one of the big ones, and yeah, so what you're speaking to is when I create a data flow, the reason why there's always those 3 additional artifacts that are also created is because it's how it's going to process it.
Yes.
Previously with Power BI data flows, like they would talk about you load everything into like a bronze data flow. And then if I want to do transformations, I would connect those in the same workspace. And that would be the linked computed entity. Basically, everything gets loaded in from the source system, and then the transformations would happen. But with data flows in Gen 2, that can all happen within the same data flow. So already kind of a really big
like
shift.
A proper ETL pipeline.
Yeah,
true.
So all in this,
building multiple ETL pipelines that have to build upon one another.
Yes, and exactly.
And I had a creepy suspicion that, yes, there's data flows, and yes, there's Power Query in the back end here. But I had a creepy suspicion that even Dataflows Gen 1 is using some sort of shared SQL serverless machine that's kind of helping you make the data flow run, would be my opinion. And I think this Dataflows Gen 2 just basically shows a bit more behind the curtain what's actually happening. And this thing called the Enhanced Compute Engine, I don't think it's anything fancy. I think it's just SQL Server. Actually, I think it's just a serverless SQL Server that's getting spun up that's helping you do these transformations with a compute engine in real time as you're doing these loads of the data, and then it's going, and then it's spooling down and doing something else. So I think what you're seeing here is a bit more of behind the curtains of what was already happening, but you actually get objects now that, again, from our understanding, you shouldn't touch them. Don't delete them. We did that. It broke things. So don't delete the objects. Don't remove them. When you create a data flow, it will create some additional objects. And we learned it.
Well, at least, from a content perspective, being out early also includes the often, because initial impressions or the way things work, and we've outlined this in previous podcasts.
Yes.
Like, hey, we're talking about this thing, and the next time we talk about it, there's probably going to be something new.
Well,
it's an iterative thing.
Yes, agreed.
Here's the major mind shift, though, with the data flows. That to me, this is when the mic dropped. Anytime you've ever built in Power Query, what's been kind of one of the best practices, the cardinal things: only load in what you need. That's that ability to do the check mark to say enable load or not, because if you load it in, it's going to go into your model, which will only do what you need. In Dataflows Gen 2, that option, which should not be called that anymore, is actually what enables the computed entity to basically be enabled, since the Dataflow Gen 2s are really meant to go to a destination source. And again, that's very different from how we had data flows before. Before, whatever I would load in would be available, so to speak, like a SQL table. But now, whenever I disable or enable that load, that's basically adhering to how Power BI is going to, in a sense, process. Is it going to use the computed entity? Is it going to stage it in that data flow? Because again, it doesn't matter if everything's enabled, because it's only about what you're actually getting pushed on. So huge shift in thinking.
Yeah. Check out the article. I think it's very relevant. If you want to know more details around what Dataflows Gen 2 is doing, the article is in the chat window, and we'll make sure we put it in the description of the video as well. Another article that's coming out. Tommy, you've got one here from What Can AI Do with a Toolbox? We probably need to make a new nickname for Tommy. He's probably going to have to be like the prompt master or something like that. Something along those lines, because he's always telling Seth and I, like, check out this new prompt that I made around this really amazing thing there. Working with data, asking questions of the business users, developing, DAX equations or whatever. Tommy's always got prompt things. And I think this article you found, Tommy.
Yeah, so we've talked about this before, about and Microsoft's been pushing, oh yeah, Power BI is coming with Copilot, but with Fabric and everything going on, it's like, who's going to be owning that? We've talked about the users, right? Recently, OpenAI released what they're calling the code interpreter. So like, oh, it's for developers, but basically that's not it at all. It's just basically now everything ChatGPT is doing, it's writing its Python and then giving you an answer that way. So basically, rather the whole end of the article here is kind of the major focus here, where the author here, I think his name is Ethan, basically just goes through and just starts asking very basic questions. But because ChatGPT is basically going to write the Python itself and then give an answer, he basically goes through how, and just a very brief example, he uploaded 2 files, and he basically asked ChatGPT to do some merging transformations. And it understood itself, like, hey, these 2 column names were different in each one, so let me merge it this way. And he'll show you all the Python code on how he's doing the transformations. So kind of incredible is like when you think about how it's even updating itself in real time, going, no, this is not going to work, let me try it this way. Then he even goes into not just the ETL of what now AI can do, or at least ChatGPT, but then just analysis, where rather than giving this very detailed prompt to say, I want to see these columns with this, he's like, show me some insights, like show me what's good here. And if you go through the article, it's insane just with his questions asked, and then what basically AI was basically coming out with. And we think about what we do. Again, this to me is the closest we're getting to, or we've got so far, to how that's going to affect us.
I think the interesting one about this is it's not just analysis, right? It's running the data through predictive models. It's doing data science activities. It's writing the code. And what he was describing is it was correcting itself in column naming and because the Python code it was generating was auto fixing its errors as it went along, So I think he comes to the same conclusion that we've talked about, but it kind of broadens I think the spectrum of how where and how AI is going to impact jobs, right? Because one of the things he points out here is it did something in minutes that would take him 2 weeks to do, or like took forever to learn in his PhD program around the statistical model. And if we think about like, coding like SQL and whatnot, but like the power here is like, is it the fringes, right? Is it these really long degrees in math and science and like that create really complex models and diagrams that have to like pull in data, make it a hypothesis, and then you get an output where AI is going to be actually most useful and dangerous, right? Because you can't do this like our other points. You need to have people that are in there understanding all of those things to say, yeah, this is actually a sound model. This is actually a valid output, right? But the speed at which you're able to understand whether or not that's a valid model and have all the reasoning behind it, man, just puts you light years ahead of where you were. And it's the speed to market or the speed to insight that AI is just going to, I think, still blow our minds with, right? Like we know it's here, we know it's coming, but like when it gets implemented, I think he was just like, oh my goodness, right? Like you can run through so much more, so much faster than before. And that's crazy.
I think
I think the last point. The guardrails are what's going to be important here, right?
Yes.
It's very exciting. All of this is going to change or has the potential to change a lot of what we do. But just because you can type in a prompt and say, hey, write me an end-to-end ETL and da-da-da-da-da, and run this through a statistical model, and I need this and this and this, and you cannot take that and run with it. And I think that's what some people are going to do. They're just going to be like, yep, I did this thing. And upon review, it's going to be like, no, you didn't. Because if you did, then you would have caught this.
Yes.
All of this is an error. This whole output is not good, and that kind of thing.
I think the big takeaway for me, a lot of this AI stuff, one is you better learn how to start prompting things, right? Figure out what prompting looks like. I am continually using Bing Chat more frequently than I'm using Google anymore, because not only does it give me a ability to ask a better question, it gives me a faster answer by looking at the pages where the answer is coming from and summarizing details. The other day I was trying to look up a Python, statement that I needed. Well, I went to Google, I asked the question, and it gave me the articles that I needed, but I had to go to the page and then sift through the article and get to the point in the article that told me the answer that I needed. So it was like a couple extra clicks and some scrolling. Well, I went to Bing Chat and it just asked the question and boom, there's the answer. It literally gave me, here's the code you need to write. And it came from this source, and it also references it on this source and this source. So it's like some of this, how do I know? To me, that's one. One is prompting. The second thing is discernment, right? When I see these answers are coming out of the AI generated thing, what is the AI doing to confirm this answer to me, to confirm the solution? Hey, this is the line of code that you need to write, and I found it in 3 examples on these 3 websites. Okay, that seems more credible than just I went to one website on one thing using a Google search to get there. So I think to me, it's going to start evolving into this, and the discernment of the answers, the discernment of the output is going to be very interesting. As far as this relates to Power BI, I'm very interested to seeing where AI can be applied in the Python library area.
Oh, this is perfect. Yeah.
So when you get to notebooks inside Fabric, how will this help me build? Again, I want to learn more Python. I want to be better writing at Python statements. I just need someone to guide me. I really need like the co-pilot to come alongside and say, okay, here's what you wrote. If you wrote this statement this way, it would save you, compute time, or, Why not in DAX give me the Italian copilot that says, hey, your context transitioning is happening here. Did you know this? Hey, you wrote this. It should be able to analyze your statement and say, hey, here's 3 more DAX statements that would accomplish the same thing. You may want to try these, and they may have faster performance based on this, and this. That's the kind of stuff that we really want, because I still need to write code. I just need to supplement the code writing with something that's a bit more knowledgeable, or taking that library of, the internet has the answer. It's somewhere out there. I just can't get my hands on it all the time.
Yeah. When you say like in Italian, are you talking like Marco or Tommy? Because
you don't want the Tommy.
Marco would probably be like, here's the DAX,
Yeah.
here's the DAX thing. If it was Tommy, like every 15 minutes, it'd be like, are you sure you don't want a break? Maybe you need some spaghetti.
I think you should add a cannoli to this statement.
Like halfway through, like, what are we talking about?
I need some pasta.
But we are, honestly, Mike, we're not far off now when you think about the examples that were shown here that's now already available, and being able to connect to your Fabric workspace. Just upload like, hey, I have this. I want to do these transformations.
Yes.
One really quick thing from the article, I don't know if you caught it, but it's kind of like called a ghosting moment with GPT and where we're getting to. We'll kind of sum it up this way. This new feature, he basically just asked the basic question. He said, hey, with all the tools that you have, create a new meme that's your experience working with humans on a day-to-day basis. And he's like, okay. And so by itself, that's all he asked. And by itself, GPT came up. He said, I work with humans, and it's a wide range of questions. There's 4 images it generated, all in Python. The first one is a computer says, I'm an AI developed by OpenAI. Ask me anything. Next one is a person, little stick person. What's the weather today? The next image is the AI says, I'm sorry, I don't have internet access to answer real-time questions. And then the human says, so how do you know about OpenAI? But then he even says to himself, the humor comes from the irony that while I can provide a wide range of questions, I'm unable to answer real-time questions due to my internet restrictions.
It's wild. Like
what?
It's picking up weird stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's interesting because it's picking up the nuances of the language and the nuances of joking things. Yeah.
But guys, please check out the end of that article. I mean, we are getting close to just how important it's going to be on our day-to-day.
To plug into it, I think and this is what you keep referencing. It's the prompting. It's get familiar.
Yes.
It's understand that this is here.
Yep.
And the quicker you understand the capabilities of what is here now and coming, and this article is like the next version, right?
Yes.
The next thing, I think he got an early preview.
Yeah.
Is these are accelerators for you. Huge.
Oh my God.
Right? Like you need to get on board. You need to like leverage them and think about how you might leverage them in your day-to-day.
Agreed. All right. Great conversation. Fun stuff there. I'm excited to see where AI takes itself in the next 2 years. I can't imagine what's going to look like in 3 years from now, or a year from now even. It's going to be so different. So it'll be very interesting to keep tabs on that one. Moving forward with some kind of deeper thoughts here. This is a bit more of a conceptual, discussion today. The article for today is from Data Mozart website. It's Nicola has a really good job, does a great job teaching people how to do the DP300, DLP 300. I think it's the test for Microsoft Power BI. Essentially, it's the data engineering test. So he does some training around that, but has been doing a number of years of consulting. And this blog post is really good. And I was curious.
And he's Microsoft certified trainer.
Certified trainer. MVP and MVP. Yeah, correct. Sorry, I messed all the things. So incredibly smart gentleman. Really like his stuff. The thought on this process is just very well thought out. And I thought this was a great exercise. And as I was building some new data models, I was really going through and thinking, yeah, this is a valuable exercise to go through with anytime you're building data models, to really understand the different types of data models you should be building. And it's the same data model, but it's different levels of depth on what the data is doing together. And I think this kind of dovetails into a lot of conversations when working with teams around, do you understand, like how does the data engineer or data analyst, how can you understand what the business is talking about in their data? What are the different things that interact together, and how does that data interact as a model? So I'll drop the article here in the chat window. Any initial thoughts on the article? Maybe we should summarize briefly about the article.
I think perfect timing for me.
Yeah.
I was discussing data modeling, like the importance of a new data model, different paradigm, different way. Like we have a base. Now we need to build this new data model. And long conversations yesterday, even.
Good.
And as I was thinking about it tonight, or like last night, like how do I describe this body of work?
Yes.
The business, right? Because it's when you say, hey, it's hard for people to understand, like we are already using this data. We already use this data in different ways.
Yes.
But where we want to take it is the next level, next steps. And I'm like, how do I describe that body of work? So like coming into this morning, I'm like, man, I love the way he outlined this.
Yes.
The process by which you break this down. The differences between the types of models that you talk about, and ultimately there's some key phrasing he uses in here, but I love the article. It's spot on, and it's a great one for being able to articulate the components and what you mean when we and I'm a huge I'm the individual that you not overuses, but you say data model a lot. What is the data model?
Yes.
Right? So this, I think, is a valuable exploration, not just to help the audience here articulate, but anyone who's listening is just to go here, check it out. All of a sudden you're like, oh, that's what all these things are. And it locks those into place and will ease your conversations with the business for sure.
And one thing I'll kind of, let's, talk, about the article. So we say in the podcast, we say probably the buzzword all the time, data model. And then there's basically two things that are going along with this one. And I think I've had to make a distinction in my mind. A data model is more of a concept, and then the data set comes from PowerBI.com. So the data set is the representation of what a data model is doing. And so this article talks about the three stages of a data model. It talks about the conceptual model. What are the core pieces of data? What are the physical things, right? For example, in the article, it talks about going to a concert. Everyone's been to a concert or an event at some point in time. There's the attendee of the event, right? The person who's attending an event may buy some food. Therefore, you now become a customer of the event. The event is run in a park, a stadium. There's a venue that applies to the event. And then in order to get into the event, you need to have a ticket. So these are all like physical things, but they all kind of interact together to represent the experience of going to a concert. So you start off with this kind of high-level conceptual model. That's your first point of contact in the article. What are the main objects and how do they interact together? And then from the conceptual model, you work on, okay, let's talk about what is the logical data model. You start saying, okay, what data points do I have related to, or what are the columns that represent customer information? Do we have a primary key? Do we have their name, their address, things about the customer? What is on the ticket? Did they buy a certain type of ticket? What does that look like? So there's all these details that support these different objects and how they interact together. And then finally, you get all the way down to the bottom where you start saying, I'm going to build the physical model where I'm literally creating like the Power BI data model with columns, with tables, and we have various objects that are actually linking things together, right? The stadium needs to have an ID column that links to an event, right? The event occurs at the stadium ID. So what does that look like? And I think to me, this really helps explain how, in my mind, I've been doing this all along, but now seeing it represented in a very clearly articulated way, I thought this was just incredible. So that was my impression initially.
Yeah, like when you sent the article over or you put it in our topic board, I'm like, Mike, I think we're a little past what a data model is, because that's what the topic was. But
yeah,
no, when you actually, this goes perfect too, honestly, with conversations we've had around Fabric on like the lake house and how much table or data we're adding into one lake house.
Mm-hmm.
But I think even more, I feel like we just had this conversation the other day. I think it was yesterday, but the idea though too, now we're like, it's more this conceptual data model. It's bringing in the business, and it's also an investment for the business to building the data model. Yeah. And I love that sense concept there, where think about when what data models have meant to us, for the last 7 years. It's like, oh, it's a Power BI model. We build that, then we try to then frame it around what the business needs are, because then we're asking the questions.
That's true.
Right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
And I think if you go back to like the conceptual model, I think is a lot of, again, as a data developer, right? A data engineer, data analyst, whatever you want to call it, right? As a data developer, I think a lot of the times we miss the boat on the conceptual model.
Yeah.
I mean, you can literally step back and say, let's look at our entire business. Like I run, a lemon, what is that? A lemonade stand, right? I run a lemonade stand. Let's just step back and say, what are the things that are important to us? What do we care about as a business? Any business can sit back and say, let's talk conceptually around how we do business. What are the artifacts? What are the different objects that we care about? And how do all those relate? Once you start with that conceptual model, I think a lot of other things become clearer. And then when you start talking about these other details, there's always challenges when you start talking between, okay, well, how does a customer relate to our products? What does that look like? Okay, we have, another example here. We have 7 different channels by which someone can buy something from our company, right? They could buy our product through Amazon. They could buy our product at Walmart. They could buy it direct ship from our website. Like there may be multi-channels of sales that are going on at the same. So how do you articulate that complication? Well, the conceptual model allows you to pinpoint areas of friction or where you need to spend extra time designing a data model because there is more complex interaction between the different data points.
Well, and it's in the importance between that and, again, having the business more involved. We've talked about the idea of this data contract, and I think this is a big part of that, where, hey, I can only do so much. I can build a data model for you and I can make it work, run like a Lamborghini. But if we want it accurate, if we want it to be able to be flexible, you have to tell me, business, what are the, how does everything work? And you need to tell me this from a business point of view. What are those trigger points? What are the thresholds here on how we're getting the information in? What's important, again, not the technical side, but what are those important elements? So again, it becomes, we're speaking the same language. We all have the understanding from the outset.
I think the two things that strike me right off the top that I 100% appreciate is he lays out the main reasons why you go about this process, and I think one of the, I'm not going to say us as BI developers are hacks, but like there are we cover the spectrum of data engineering, ETL, models, reporting. Like we cover a lot of ground.
Yes,
but there are roles. There are larger companies, people who do data modeling, data architects, right? Like you could argue are 2 different roles or the same as well. But ultimately, he starts from the right premise, which is, his point is that I agree with 100%, is data models are about creating trust, a shared understanding between the business and data professionals. The goal is to increase business value with data. Start there. Start and stop, right? Like this is
everyone can agree on that.
This is why we're going to go down this route. And I've found myself like in situations recently where we're talking a lot about data modeling, because the points here are, just because you build a pipeline of data and do some transforms and you now have a table of information that you might be using does not mean you have a data model. You've ingested some data and you're getting some value out of it. I love
That's very true.
analogy he uses here with the house. And this is, I'm straight up stealing this conversation point. So thank you, Nicola, because this is exactly what you need to engage in right away with the business in the conceptual model. And a lot of the ideas that I've been obtusely describing, I'm going to take away today and go straight to building a conceptual model that I can have conversations with the business. Because especially with data, and all of us, anybody listening knows this, there is so much nuance. And when you try to elevate or build a data model to move you in different directions, to do things above and beyond just rote data coming in, there are a lot of challenges that we need guidance on. We need to understand, what does the business want to do with things? And a lot of times business confuses that with them telling us what to do. And that's not the case. And that's why I love this house example, because building an ETL, like to ingest some data and make it useful to the organization, is like your foundation. If you're the build, like if you're the owner and I'm the builder of the house, you absolutely care where rooms go. You care what goes in the room. You care what, like, how things look and how they're structured. And throughout the article, as he lays out these different types of models, I think he keys in on that important aspect of, if you don't pay attention and do this modeling that is extremely important from a conceptual, logical, and physical realm, and go implement with like the investment as an organization, can you whip things together without that? You betcha. But if the owner comes and he all of a sudden sees you put the bathroom on the wrong side of the house, how long do you think it's going to take you after the fact to tear it down, rebuild it over on the other side of the house, as opposed to doing it the first time the right way? And that's the argument here, right? That I love in detail, that we'll walk through in these different types, because it's very specific of a lot why you do these modeling, but it shapes the conversation.
Yes.
And puts it in the platform of like, yeah, you can skip this. But this kind of goes back to our point. We were talking about something related but different, where I was just like, yeah, that's a maybe it was, this was the where business starts to choose to have really important information only in the reporting layer that isn't part of your source system, right? You can build this thing, sure, but if they come back and they're like, well, now we want to tweak it, right? Well, in this analogy, I finished your bathroom 100%, and now you want black tile instead of white tile, and every wall and every surface is tile. Well, I can do that, but I can either spray paint it or I got to start over, right? And this is where I'm so keyed in. Love the analogy he uses, and I think it's the framework for that bedrock conversation, because these aren't simple things. This isn't something you whip out the door. But if you have that like proper process and conversation, there are absolutely ways you can incrementally iterate towards solutions, but it's all built on the right foundation and the right architecture.
Well, yeah, I mean, when we say trust, I think I'm just going back to, it's just aligning expectations from the onset, of not just like what the end result's going to be, but what is it supposed to do? What are we actually, and again, what is the actual concept here, right? Like, what is all the logic? What's important to me from the business? All that being said, though, this does now require more time, or should require more time from the business to be even more involved, because you think about everything up until now, it's build me a report, and I'll give you some brief information. You should know where our sales data is. And then there's all the nuances there that we may miss from the onset. And then you're like, to your point, Seth, we're building that in Power BI some convoluted way. And there may be a calculated column somewhere because we have to adhere to that. But if we're going to do things the right way every time, right, then this does require a better conversation with the business, and more time spent from them with more of their input too.
One thing I'll add here from my experience on this one has been, when you spend time to build out the conceptual model all the way down to a physical model, when you start with conceptual things first, you start identifying earlier in the process a larger data model that can serve the needs of more reports, because you start thinking about all the other data elements that you may need to bring together. Now, you may not have the data to support all the different objects, but at least you know what data links together and what that looks like. And as you go from the conceptual piece into what the data model is doing, there is some really relevant, I mean, you have to decide where the relationships live inside your data model. And I think this is a very good method by which you can say, we do need to understand the interaction between customers and sales. How do these two separate tables relate together? And then you can really have these conversations around, okay, when we're talking about information about a customer, what part of that data is a factual piece of information or a dimensional piece of data? Because that, again, in the chat, someone was talking about a lot of times people are trying to solve very complex data challenges with more complex DAX. which in reality boils down to typically your data model is just wrong. Like the way you shaped the data is not correct to support the kind of analysis that you want. So if you step back and say, okay, let's relook at what the data model is doing and pull back a bit, I think that really helps you design and build better data models. So I really think that this is if I'm teaching star schemas, if I'm teaching individuals how to data model, to provide data modeling capabilities to your team, I think I'm starting with this. I think I'm really starting with like, hey, go ahead.
Yeah. The conceptual data model approach simplifies what we talk about all the time, which is lead with a visual, right? If we're having a conversation about complex topics within the business, right? Like having a conceptual model, which is just high level. We're talking customers. How does this relate to something, right? That can elicit so many different conversations within a business or a particular business unit. You're saying, hey, what we're doing here is we're trying to understand and figure out, like, how do we get from point A to point B? And this is what this looks like from our high level. And that alone, I think, elicits a lot of conversation that would help you drive for building a better model. Now, like one of the nuances I want to make here is like we could be talking a Power BI model, like a tabular model, or you could be talking about a data model in the back end that's going to serve much more
the warehouse
than just
model.
That reporting source. Correct.
Yeah, agreed. These could be tables that live in the warehouse.
Right. This is where having that larger conversation, it like builds this ecosystem of objects that could be required for your business to move forward.
Yes.
But does that mean that you need to build the whole thing before you get any value? And no. But understanding all of those pieces absolutely is a foundation for moving forward, because otherwise it'd be like, well, we got the basement figured out, so the main level and the roof, that'll all figure itself out as we go.
Just slap it on.
Will it? Or like, I want to build this side of the house and not care about what the other side looks like. So you're going to build 3 levels and not connect it to anything? Like, we could do that, but
well, and I think too, there's a big part there where as you go through that exercise, you can identify too where the flags are, where the potential barriers are. And again, that's also the expectations and with the business where it's like, I really know you love the beach, you want to build a beach house, but there's alligators. Based on what you're telling me, there's alligators out there. So let's talk about this and identify.
Did you know alligators can climb fences, by the way?
Did not. But
oh boy,
all get out.
Yeah.
So,
one more reason not to live in Florida.
Yeah, exactly. But identifying, like, I know this is what you're trying to do, but based on what you're telling me, right? Like, there's some things we got to figure out if we're going to get the end result. Because too often we realize when we're trying to do the visuals, it's not going to work that way, because all the way upstream there's this additional logic, or the way the business thinks.
Yes. And I think there's also flexibility here. So Donald, you make a really good point in the chat here. Donald's talking about you don't so Kimball, kind of like a stake in the data modeling world, right? And the Kimball modeling system is kind of how you would model data together. Kimball says you should build a model around a business process and not a particular report. And I think a lot of times we get tripped up around thinking, I need this report with this data on it. And we focus a bit too much on the report level. And then we don't ever come back up to what is the conceptual model? How does all the data interact together? And we don't focus on the business process. And I think this also alludes to when we talk about this all the time on the podcast, which is we need to take action on the data. Just presenting you with information is helpful, but I think the enrichment of that data, or being able to look at something, walk away and take action on that, or know what you need to do to fix the numbers, basically, right? Because the monitoring, the reporting, it's all a behavior modificator, right? It's there to support your actions to do something different that changes the direction of that line chart, that bar chart, whatever you're looking to get to. You're looking to get to a goal, and the numbers are trying to help you track to that end goal. So identifying more clearly what is the business process that you're doing and aligning that to your main goals and objectives. And I think as I get into this, sometimes I think sometimes businesses lose or overcomplicate the business process. There's too much in the business process, which overcomplicates it, and therefore makes it a lot harder to use the operational system, to collect the data, to write the reports. And anyway, I'll have another point, but I'll leave that for there now.
It is, business process on top of data. I mean, I thought you were going to like, and correct me if I'm wrong, like in the business process conversation, like the levels of, at first I thought we were talking about like levels of scalability, right? Like if you think about an area of business that needs a report, are you going to give them that specific report? Or are you looking at that business area and what they entail, and you build a model, and then you can build many reports off that, right? So
that's kind of where I was going.
like,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So
because
if you model the data in a like as the process is running for the business process, right? That's the goal. I mean, the goal is here's a data model that can serve your insightful needs. Build what you want to build at the report level. I'll teach you how to build your own reports, but here's how here's how your data interacts together, right? These things are related. These tables have these relationships. Here's the calculations you can use. When you define those things, now you teach that business unit to rely on that data model, and that becomes their source of truth for whatever they need to do. So now you're spending less time building reports and you're doing more time data modeling.
Well, and also it causes to go farther upstream too with any transformations we're going to do, because if we know certain concepts or trigger points, we can then kind of integrate that in part of the upstream of the detail process. Like, well, they never include this, or that we always have to account for X, Y, and Z, or whatever the framework or the scenario is, which there's again always nuances, and we can tackle that farther upstream in part of our own process. I do want to ask you guys something though, because as I was going through this and I'm thinking about how does this actually work in a real world setting, so to speak, right? Because I immediately go to, okay, are we doing this for every Power BI data model? When does this conversation occur? And then basically like how much investment do you need from the business with you? What's acceptable in terms of the amount of time? And what are we trying, like, I guess I'm thinking, what is the actual output that we're expecting from the business? And then are they willing to do that?
I was just writing that note, right? We've talked a lot about like, what is our report build process, and asking questions to the business is one thing, but I think the structure of, even on a simple level, building a conceptual, logical, physical data model, like it seems like a perfect fit for talking data behind a report, right? Because if you're the business user, and sometimes this could be a super simple conversation, but more often than not, it's not, right? How do they understand the business? And if you're breaking things down from even from the reverse, right? Like, you know where the data is, you're going to break it, you're going to build this facts and dimensions. You've already got your physical model like figured out. Like layering that up to the high level conceptual, hey, business user, let me describe for you like how I pull your data together, right? This is what we're going to do on a high level here, like having that conversation with the visual part to it, I think creates a really firm foundation for you to move forward and make sure that you're all on the same page with the data, right? Whereas before, I think this was something we've talked about where you would just suss out with questions, right? And I think you do that more so in visuals. But I love this example because it gives structure just enough in many different scenarios. I could easily simplify this for a side conversation of a report, or it could be much more complex, or it could lead to me like misunderstanding a key element of what their area of business is. And therefore, like this is something I'm going to introduce as a structural piece in that report build process.
Agree. I'd also like to kind of note here as well, as you think about this one, I've had this nagging kind of thought in the back of my head for a portion of this, where we're talking about, does every single data model get this? Does this happen every single time? I think you made a really good point there, Seth, around like this could be kind of a lightweight version of this, right? You could kind of like distill this down to a simpler version, but you could also ramp this up to a bigger investment of time and say, if we're making certified data sets that live within your organization, right? I think for sure there's more rigor the more important those data models become, right? So if we're talking in larger data models that are going to serve many reports, if it's coming out of the central BI team, you're spending more time and rigor around doing this type of activity, really documenting what this is. And I would also argue, once you're done with this, go put this back on your center of excellence. Like there's going to be in your center of excellence or your community of practice page, right? Here's the data model that we built. In this data model, here's the logical model that we're going after. I think a lot of this to build trust is to communicate back the output of these deliverables in a way that people can read, understand, comprehend. Here's why we're doing things the way we are, because I can't tell you how many times people ask things of a report that it's not designed to do. And I think this is another way of saying this report has boundaries on what it can and cannot do, or this data model has boundaries on what it can and cannot do. Here are the boundaries.
So Raphael makes a crack in here in the comments. So you have a full, beautiful CI/CD, and you get an email like, "I need this in this column now because board meeting, whatever, and your release cycle is monthly releases." Like, to me, this conversation about modeling is a relevant one on a report by report basis. It's these structural pieces are good conversation points. From there, we'll talk about logical data models and like the elements of that conversation that bring forward challenge points to make sure we're on the right track. Like there is, and then like in the context here, are we talking about building enterprise data models and houses and in just like investments in time? Yes, right. I think organizations need a balance of both. One, I don't think a team or like this thing is a blocker for business to get what it needs. I think it should have data and the tables available to it to generate their own reporting and meet the needs of every day being a fire drill for a business user, right? There's a balance in here where you have the organizational development and movement in a direction that is going to serve the needs of the enterprise holistically, as well as a self-serve methodology where people are getting their answers as they go along with an understanding that it doesn't come with the same type of SLAs, right? And as you and we talk a lot about like if that ecosystem is working well, there's this graduation path. Like how do you build or move things that have gotten a lot of adoption into the enterprise realm, or how do you substitute structures and things that have been built now that have SLAs, that have all of that, certification behind them into other reporting. And we talk a lot about that a lot. So I just want to iterate. This conversation is not about like, hey, IT is going to go in its own, hole and go build its own thing without any input from the business or restrict the business from access to data. It's not that.
Well, see, I kind of took it, the scalability side of it, Seth, where thinking about where does it get applied. Your house that you build is only going to be as good as the neighborhood who, in a sense, around it. So the framework is so important too, where no data model exists on its own siloed. If you did this whole practice and everything out on the outside was, completely unstructured, it's not going to have a lot of success. Yeah. So if kind of the same idea of building a neighborhood, right? It's like, do we have the electrical and the plumbing that's already can work? So if we need to build another house, a good example is like marketing data. If you've ever worked with a marketing team, they're like, hey, we need a report. And you're like, okay, what are you doing now? It's like, well, we have 17 sources that we've never had to talk to each other. And we basically look at all these things and we just want you to combine all this. And it's like, hold on. And it's like, and
to that point, though, there is in someone's mind, there's some kind of weird, like in the marketing data pieces of things, there's a lot of data coming in that doesn't necessarily join together. Right?
Yeah. And this is where ever thought of this.
This is a good segue into the logical data model.
Yeah. Right? So exactly.
That the concepts here, right? Even after you get approval, business is like, yep, looks good. Yep, making relationship from customers to tickets. Yep. Sounds good. Okay, we're going to invest some more time. We're going to dig into the details, right? And that's where you start looking at keys and relationships and fine tuning those like high level relationships in that logical model. And it's to Nicola's point, it stress tests the concepts. This is exactly where you start running into those problems. Be like, okay, I understand one of the business objectives is this. We don't have that data or all the data in this source system is only partially completed. If we're going to rely on this relationship, you guys need to go fix all this. And we're going to do that before we get down this road because what we're building here is a blueprint for us to actually go build something. And that logical data model, I think, addresses a lot of those or challenges that need to be discussed, need to be overcome, and then also shifts into what is the business going to do? What is the business responsibilities and actions to make all this work? We're going to go build the physical while you're fixing these things, and there's going to be this symbiotic relationship of us moving towards a direction that's going to serve our organization long term. And then you have the side stuff. We're obviously, like, you're supporting your near term things, but this isn't like an all or nothing. All your data is going to get stuck behind this stuff,
which is so important that the business understands the concept of us and their role in the modeling side. As you talk, I keep going to examples that we've had where like, why can't you do? We've built this. Like, yeah, but you did it one time on Excel. And yeah, I'm a data analyst. I'm one of the BI guys here, but you have to understand, if we're going to build this, we need something in a way that it's going to work in Power BI. And they're like, then why use Power BI? Because again, the idea of 17 unstructured sources and the way businesses have done things, like, yeah, I've just downloaded everything and made it by date. It's like, it doesn't work like that. So having them understand too, when we become part of a project, on like what our goal there is, it's not just the visual. It's not just we're going to build a fancy report.
I mean, some things that I've seen when doing joins across different data sources, there usually seems to be this need to have an area where there are people that can edit, modify, build, data that is homeless. It has no home. And what I mean, particularly for the marketing data, it is data that is, so these other systems that you're grabbing data from, the marketing efforts, the spend, like there's all these third-party tools that you use to help the marketing team do their job. It feels like a lot of the times the rigor on which we enter data into these third-party systems, we think about these tools in a way of, I just can use this tool, as opposed to, how am I going to tie all this data together again when we come back and bring everything back together? And to your point, Seth, I think earlier was, when you start building this logical model, you start understanding, hey, you can't abbreviate the product code number. I've had cases where they're like, oh, we only have 5 digits to have in this field, and we have a 7-digit product code, so we abbreviate this and add some other data here that helps us kind of get close to what the match is. That's not a match. Like, we're adding a whole bunch of business logic because the tool you're trying to use is insufficient for what you want to build, or we're selling things on a platform that doesn't have a full descriptor of what we're trying to look for. Like, there's not a clear link between what that is and everything else. So there's all these really weird scenarios where people need to be involved to generate data in order to bind and collect the data together.
Yeah.
And I think the point here made by another one in chat was, data quality is another big topic on this one, because what we're talking about here is the logical model starts really pointing at how good is the quality of data. How many data fields come back with blanks? Is that going to be a problem?
You can't, and this is like, it's not part of the it is part of the conversation, but the modeling is the first thing in order for you to be able to do data quality and data governance. So if those are important factors in your organization, you are investing in enterprise type activities towards data models. Yeah. We're going to run out of time here, but like physical data model is essentially where we're taking the previous models, which are really logical, like wrong word, tool agnostic, right? This is how data works within our ecosystem, and the physical data model is taking that logical and laying out the platform related steps, actual implementation of tables, columns, keys, constraints, indexes, whatever we need to do to make the things work. But ultimately, I love the fact that, like, this is a great way in both tangents. One, to create a blueprint for the technical builds, but also set the stage not just in the initial conversations, but also have the place to go back to when changes are going to be requested by the business. And what that creates is a shared understanding, even if it stays at the conceptual model, a shared understanding between business, IT, and is I think, foundation for moving forward in adopting new things into the model or adjusting as you go along. Right. And I love how he laid this out. I think it makes a ton of sense. And I'm going to get a lot of use out of it. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, the last part that probably could be a whole episode in itself as I think about this is once you build the house, right? It's also the investment, like can you pay your mortgage? And so there's going to be things that
can you afford it?
Can you afford it, right? Because there may be the upkeep. So just to kind of piggyback on the marketing example, one of the proudest things I've done career-wise in the state was basically creating or working with business on creating a whole marketing platform tracking. So basically creating one unified tracking code that went to all their systems, and they didn't understand why we're doing it at first. But it's like, no, you put this and it'll actually go sent everywhere, but it's the same key. And we built in Power Apps. But the idea here was they had to follow that structure because there was nothing.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah,
you're changing the business process such that the data is actually able to join back together. And that's the power here.
Right. And so,
yes.
But the idea is you're only going to be as good, and you have to understand, do you have the investment from them?
Yes.
Again, are they going to be able to pay whatever they're asking for?
That's why the executive sponsor's there, right?
Yeah.
That's why we're trying to like stitch this stuff together and get it all working, because without that executive sponsor, we can't push on other teams to like, hey, we actually need to change your process. You're literally giving us not enough information to make what you want a reality. Help us build what we need to build in order to bring the relationships together.
Like Florida in 2008. So.
Yeah. So I'm gonna jump in here. ChatGPT. I asked quick ChatGPT, what's the difference between the conceptual, logical, and physical data models? And I thought it did a good job of summarizing part of this article, but also with what we've been talking about here in the conversation. The three models are: the conceptual model is used to establish their entities, their attributes, and the relationships. The logical data model defines a structure of the data elements. It sets the relationships between them, and it's more detailed than your conceptual model, but is also technology agnostic and business oriented. And I thought those 2 points were very relevant. You're not really building a Power BI data model. It's still kind of in that higher level version. And Seth, to your point earlier, it made it 100%. These could be tables in your gold layer, in your medallion architecture, in your lakehouse. That's what those could be the final tables you're building. They're designed, ready to be consumed by any tool, whatever you're going to build. And then finally here, you have the physical data model, which is that describes the database specific implementation, right, of the data model, right? That is, build it in Power BI, build it in SQL Server, whatever that physical object looks like. That is it incorporates all the different data types, the conventions, and the limits of that data model. So anyways, really good conversation today. If you like this conversation, if you thought this was really cool, if you enjoyed talking about data modeling and getting super into the weeds, definitely go check out the article from Nicola around data modeling, and it's also in the description. So check that out. Great article. Go read it. Our only ask, if you enjoyed this conversation, if you enjoyed this topic, please just give us a like or a thumbs up and tell somebody else about it. That's how we get the word out about this podcast. If you enjoyed it, let somebody else know you found medium value from it. You can kind of relate to the modeling that we were talking about and discussing. Thank you all for your listenership, and we really appreciate you listening to the podcast. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
And you tell those people you can go to Apple and Spotify, make sure to subscribe. And then once you start enjoying it, go send us a mailbag topic on one you want us to talk about at powerbi.tips/the podcast. And then just watch us live Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central.
Even if you don't enjoy it, just give us some feedback. What should we do better? What can we'll take feedback. We'll take corrective criticism as well. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate your time, and we'll catch you next time.